Bible study with me and Gingersnap here. Yeah, the camera has zoomed in again after I started the video. Don't know why Facebook's doing that. Very rude. So since it is October, I am doing a little mini-series on some of the Bible characters whom I have dressed up for Halloween as in previous years. So tonight I wanted to look at a story of Salome, who is not explicitly named in the Bible, but a historian a couple centuries later identifies her as the daughter of characters in question. And anyway, it's kind of easier to refer to characters if they have a name than if, the woman in Mark 6 gets a bit confusing. So I'm going to refer to her as Salome for the sake of convenience. So this is not a story that I have preached on. No, haven't preached on it. And it's hard to get good news from Salome's perspective. But when I was in seminary, and I really must emphasize Halloween is my favorite holiday, I spent literally an entire year constructing a costume for Salome that was based on the Oscar Wilde play and on the Strauss opera, based on the English translation of the French translation, the German translation of the French translation of the English translation of Oscar Wilde's play. It gets complicated. And anyway, so that was a whole thing that I put together, which I'll get into in a bit. So, from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, with a large Bible and trying not to bump the head of the small cat. So from Mark 6, chapter 6, obviously. King Herod had heard of the miracles Jesus was doing, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him. But others said, it's Elijah. And others said, it's a new prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests, and the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it. And he solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give it to you, even half my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? She replied, the head of John the Baptizer. Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was deeply grieved. Yet, out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. This is the word of the Lord. One of Mark's favorite words is immediately. So immediately comes up like in basically every other sentence in the Gospel of John. And it is interesting here that John the Baptist's followers come and take his body and lay him in the tomb, which is a bit of a contrast to Jesus later on. So this is a very fun story. Well, I guess it's kind of a gruesome and depressing story about the perils of power and ego, really. But it's a good story. Yeah, they can be both. So yes, she's purring. So, so Oscar Wilde, at the end of his career, wrote a play called Salome. But at the time, it wasn't legal to have plays about Bible characters be performed in public. So, and this upsets Gingersnap so much that she's off to do her own thing now. Sure. So instead of having it performed in London like he had planned, he had his boyfriend translate it into French. And so it was performed in France, and then it was translated into German. And so Strauss's opera Salome is based off of that, which is just so complicated and delightful. It was eventually, like, long after his death. It was performed in London in like 1930 something, I want to say. He'd been dead for a while. Laws are interesting. Oscar Wilde was very much mistreated by the English government at the time. So in his play, he has a lot of themes of black and white and gold, and the moon and peacocks and veils, and it's this very stylized, really neat. It's more of fan fiction of the story itself rather than a telling per se, because it brings in a lot of other themes. So as I was creating my costume, because Salome's a princess, I made this fancy headdress with a veil and peacock feathers, and I had a friend do henna peacock feathers on my back, and I had all sorts of jingly things that I'm hoping are not catching the audio too much. I'm going to set that down now, and created this outfit for dancing, which I actually routinely, well, in the before times, would wear to go dancing, because Salome, because she is dancing, because she's young and beautiful, because she's got a severed head on a platter, it comes up a lot in art and dance and opera and theater, because that's a really interesting thing to depict. So there are different readings of this story, and the way that I read the story, Herod is super drunk, and that's why he's making really, really stupid promises. Like, seriously, someone's dancing and, like, that's so amazing that you want to give her up to half of your kingdom? Like, what? No, a dance is not worth that much. What the hey? That's dumb. He's super drunk. In my reading of the story, this is not explicit in the text. And he is so hung up on what his friends and his courtiers and his officers and whatever think of him, and he really wants them to think that he's a man of his word. These are jingling and bugging me. I'm going to take them out now. He's so hung up on what people think about him that he is convinced he has to do what he said that he would do, even if it means executing somebody whom he actually respected. Personally, I would have respected the guy more if he said, you know, I did say that I would give you anything that you asked for, but did not occur to me that you'd ask for somebody's head. No. First of all, no. We no. And gonna give you something else instead. So in Oscar Wilde's play, for example, the Tetrarch offers her 100 white peacocks. Which is one of the places where peacocks come up. So Tetrarch technically is like a sub-king or a governor. So King Herod is not like king of an entire country, but like the in charge of a region. So sub-king is an interesting little translation of that. So on the night of the campus Halloween party, I went around randomly quoting lines from the Oscar Wilde play and confusing the heck out of everybody there. There was no formal costume contest, but I won it because I would like to introduce you to John the Baptist, which I created out of foam and yarn and Sharpie, and I'm just going to stick him here now. John the Baptist, an excellent costume prop and also Halloween decoration, as you do. Yes. So I think it is interesting that this story is about the dangers of speaking truth to power, that John had a message that somebody in authority didn't really want to hear, And there was a very inherent danger of him saying things that weren't popular, because obviously this man has absolutely the authority to have him killed on a whim, when drunk, which honestly nobody should have the power to have people executed on a whim. That's just, no one should have that. But even though it's dangerous, John still speaks the truth and still preaches the word of God. And it is really important to have people who are brave enough to do that, because if a ruler is only surrounded by people saying things that he or she wants to hear, well, that's the vacuum, and that's bad. That's how totalitarianism happens. So speaking truth and power is important, even when it's a hard thing to do. But because there's a pretty woman dancing, that tends to be the theme that's pulled up a bit more, because it's more fun to paint. So it's also kind of cool how Salome just runs to her mom and is like, "Mom, what do I ask for?" And her mom asks for a severed head. And she doesn't bat an eyelash at this, but she adds the extra drama to it that her mom just, no, please don't attack that. Hey. Her mom just asks for the head of John the Baptist, but Salome asks for the head of John the Baptist on a platter, which is a delightful touch. I don't currently have him on a platter. It wasn't going to fit on the bookshelf. Come here. Please stop pawing at my fancy costume pieces. Thank you. So, as I was saying, the name Salome gets attached in the 5th century. Herod is a historical figure, and so there are other sources beside the Gospels that will talk about him or reference his timeline, so we do know a bit more about him. So a couple weeks ago, when I was talking about creating my Esther costume, I based that off of a painting by Rembrandt, because she was not a historical figure, and it's more a moral tale that we've told for thousands of years that says something about the nature of God, even if it didn't necessarily, like, strictly speaking, happen. It still says something important. Whereas last week's story, we were looking at Yael, there are other historians who talk about her and her timeline and the war that she was living in the middle of. And that's a while ago. So we have a little bit more that was written in the first couple centuries AD about Herod and about his wives and children. And so his wife Herodias had at least one daughter who was named as Salome in one of these historical sources, and so that is the name that is given to her kind of after the fact, and tends to be the name that's used in art and literature. So for a lot of Western history, the stories of the Bible have been a common set of stories that most people have known, because we didn't have Shakespeare in, the first couple centuries AD. Obviously, he hadn't been born yet, and we didn't have Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or whatever. And so the stories of the Bible were the shared cultural things that we all knew and referenced. I can make some references to Star Wars, and as long as I don't get too obscure, most people will probably have an idea of what I'm getting at. Theoretically, sometimes my cultural references don't land very well. Often. Not the point. But for thousands of years, people growing up in the Western civilization would have been told all of these stories. And so that would be the basis for a lot of references in art and literature and poetry. When I was rereading Jane Eyre after seminary, I was like, oh my gosh, like I caught some of this before when I read it, but there's a lot of references to the Bible in this novel, like a lot. It's really cool. Love Jane Eyre, one of my favorite novels. And that was pretty common for a long time, which is why, yes, she really wants chin scratches. Excuse me, I must scratch her. So Salome is one of the stories that is told over and over, rather like the story of Romeo and Juliet. It's just that kind of embedded in the culture. Today, we're not quite as biblically literate, I think in part because there are so many other stories that we could be learning. I mean, there's the stories of Beatrix Potter that we read to children, or the stories of whatever else. And so there's so many more options that maybe we aren't teaching severed head stories to children who then, have those stories ingrained in their minds when they want to grow up and become great artists. Honestly, what's wrong with severed head stories? It's good storytelling. Don't have people executed. Just don't. It's never going to go well. Um, so I really enjoyed learning about some of the different ways that this story has been told. I read the version in Mark. It's also told a bit shorter of a version, maybe half the verses, I think, in the Gospel of Matthew. So the death of John the Baptist does come up a couple times. Not quite as dramatic in Matthew. Such is life. I mean, everything is immediate in Mark, so everything is very dramatic. But the way that we choose to tell stories tends to emphasize what we find important in them, and it is telling how some people read these stories. So people often think that you should really have loads of integrity and do exactly what you've said that you are going to do, and stick to what you've always believed, and double down on that. And I mean, there's a lot to be said for having integrity and being a person of your word, and sticking to one thing. That there is much to be said for that. Please don't take me otherwise. But I think that it would be cool if we taught people from a young age that changing your mind or realizing that you made a mistake is not always a bad thing, because part of human growth is changing our minds on things and not just being stubborn and doubling down on something, rather than admitting that we said something really dumb while we were drunk, or some figure that we've supported, it turns out they've done something terrible that was covered up. I don't know. You don't have to keep supporting that figure. There can be some nuance in, good things have been done, but I don't endorse this. Harry Potter is currently kind of controversial. I'm not thrilled with the author at the moment. The world is complicated. Shades of gray. But you can change your mind. And I think that should be applauded, honestly, because if you're changing your mind, if you're saying, no, I did say I was going to do the thing, but actually I'm not going to do the thing because that would be a dumb thing to do. Clearly you've thought about it, and you've analyzed the situation, and you're not just doing it because you think that you're supposed to. You're now doing the thing that you believe to be good and right, and that doesn't involve having somebody's head chopped off. Changing your mind does not have to be a bad thing, and I wish that we treated it that way, but we often don't. We will refer to people as traitors to the cause if they leave a movement, and I don't really think that that's fair. Or we will be skeptical of trusting somebody who has changed their minds on somebody, or something. But we should respect that. Because you should be thinking about what you believe in, and you should be thinking about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And you should not have people executed on a whim when you're drunk. Really, I can't emphasize that enough. I hope that none of you have ever had somebody beheaded when you were drunk, but I don't know all of your backstories. That was supposed to be funny. So anyway, that was another one of the stories that I have found interesting enough to create a whole researched costume on, with jingly jewelry that I hope didn't mess with the audio too much at first. It was definitely messing with my ears. Having jingles right by your ears is annoying. So we will be back next week with another one. I hope that you are all enjoying this spooky season with pumpkin spice, whatever, and candy corn, or less disgusting forms of Halloween candy, because candy corn is not tasty. It's cute, but it's gross. Hot take, but I'm going to stand by it. Candy corn is disgusting. Anyway, so I hope that you are enjoying this spooky season and getting into the spirit of October and fall and all of that entails. And I will see you next week.